Hey guys, welcome back to the class. I left you here with this question: how different do you think American and European approaches to immigration are? And well, we'll see that actually the answer is that they are not different. The first thing I want to do for testing you is whether you can tell me what these pictures are: the American or the European border. This will be your first picture. You should know more or less because of the science. You should be familiar with that. That's actually the border between Ceuta and Morocco and the north of Africa. Ceuta being a Spanish city and Morocco. So the answer for this one would be Europe. This one is a slightly harder to tell, but I can tell you that actually is once again the border between Ceuta and Morocco. And if I ask you about this last one, I don't know if you're going to be able to tell me, but actually this is indeed the border between Mexico and the US. And this was just to prove you that actually migration policy is not different. Actually, I told you in the other half of the class that the American identity was different, was a country where migration was perceived differently, and the role that the US should have regarding migration should be different, basically because of the freedoms and the American dream and the ability that any citizen should have to fulfill the dream and to provide for themselves. If they work hard enough to get it, it wouldn't matter where they were born as long as they wanted to try. Actually, this will be connected quite tightly with the idea of liberal nationalism, but that's another topic for another day. But never mind. So by the end of the day, that identity was the one of the US. Europe hasn't had that identity. Europe nationalism was much stronger. I mean, we've had wars among European countries for centuries. We've had two world wars fought in European soil. By the end of the day, that strong European identities have been forged over time, and migration and the colonies also play a role there. I mean, if you want to add it to the analysis, but yeah, migration has never been portrayed in the same way that it has in the United States. But we can talk about what's happening with the current administration regarding, in this case, not only about migration, that you know what has happened in a sense with migration as well. I mean, the whole wall thing, but that's, you can see, this is something that in Europe we already had in a sense. So actually Europe can give no lessons to this regard, but also with refugee admissions. And actually refugee admissions have dropped since Donald Trump took office, and you see how in the US, I mean, it's dropped from 97,000 to 23,000. And actually, it's quite interesting if you look at the number of refugees entering the US. That also that kind of quota system and the targeting has also had an impact. And you see that actually now Christians are still being granted asylum in the US, while Muslims are not. And that actually has to do, sorry, with the current administration. But actually, this is a topic that you probably are more familiar with than I am myself. Actually, I'm going to tell you a little bit more about Europe. And actually, the refugee crisis that took place between 2014, 2016, 2015 being the key year in this crisis. First thing I have to tell you that it has a dual nature, because actually at that time migrants from two regions were, I mean, people from two regions, sorry, let me be precise, people from two regions were arriving in Europe. And you can see it in this map pretty well. On the one hand, we have people arriving through Greece, and actually those people we can consider them refugees. Remember the definition we gave before, the Geneva Convention definition: people that were being persecuted and they were in fear for their life in case, because they were being persecuted because of the political, religious, whatever condition. And also we had people coming from sub-Saharan Africa. So we are talking about these regions have been traditionally regions of origin of migrants, as Mali, as Ghana, so it's Senegal, Cote d'Ivoire, Somalia, Sudan, Eritrea. So different regions, and in this case, we're talking about economic migrants mainly. In this case, they're not being persecuted; they're just seeking for a better future for themselves. In the case of Syria, we can discuss whether they are refugees, that they are in most cases, or whether they are economic migrants. But I mean, clearly, refugees most likely. What was the issue here And I mean, you can see that there were two areas of access, one through Italy, through the Mediterranean, and the other one, Aegean Sea, just crossing from Turkey to Greece. So, and the main flow, I mean, was coming through Greece, indeed. Actually, I should better, never mind. I'll go to that slide later. I'll comment there. But actually, Greece was taking the most part of these refugees coming from Syria, sorry. And Greece, bear in mind that they were just coming out of the economic crisis, they were overwhelmed with the flow of people going through their country, and they didn't have the resources. But bear in mind as well that we have no borders. I mean, the Schengen can be suspended, and actually it was in some countries, but there are no borders. So these migrants, these refugees, could cross Greece and try to reach any other country in Central and Northern Europe. This was, I mean, it was not that common, but there were people trying to reach Germany and Denmark, as we mentioned before. What did the European Union do with this situation? Instead of, first attempt was to coordinate the acceptance of quotas of refugees. So European countries will take each of them a certain number of refugees. And I mean, you will see later when we talk about the position that these didn't really quite work. So actually, what did the European Union do? The European Union outsourced this problem and outsourced it through Turkey. Migrants will be returned to Turkey. Bear in mind that here we're using the term migrants, so we are not using refugees, because actually it was hard for them to prove their status and that they were being persecuted back in Syria, which, I mean, it's a given. It was a country in war, that it was being destroyed. And so migrants will be returned to Turkey. Turkey will start cooperating to prevent sea and land routes. So pretty much they will control the borders. And the European Union will financially aid Turkey with 3 billion euros to create facilities for refugees in Turkey. And so pretty much what the European Union was doing was outsourcing the problem and paying Turkey to outsource the problem. And this is where we can nowadays still see these refugee camps in Turkish soils of millions of Syrian people. Actually, this was effective. By the end of the day, arrivals dropped. I mean, the agreement, as you can see, was signed in March, and at that time, March 2016, and at that time the numbers were already decreasing, and absolutely dropped 97%. We can see that. And these were the figures I was referring before, and this, I mean, it was not only the control that Turkey had on its own borders, but it was also deterrence for the mafias, and normally were involved in this process of taking people through the Aegean Sea to Greece, that it made it harder for them as well. So what are the national positions of the European Union member states on this crisis? Actually, Germany had a kind of a hesitant role here. It was not clear that they were really pushing for further cooperating in this issue. The role of Italy was changed over time, also because the government in Italy changed. Before, we had Salvini as a vice president, as a vice prime minister, sorry, and he was a far right wing, and he actually had a strong position against migration and refugees. France and Spain were actually the ones pushing for this quota system, that each member state of the European Union will actually welcome a different number of refugees, and they will be split across the European, across the member states. And then we had Visegrad 4, and actually our country that we've already mentioned in class, Hungary, Poland, particularly, and then also Czech Republic and Slovakia. These countries were opposing fiercely this quota system. They refused to take any refugees at the time of the crisis. So actually, you can see once again that is a divided Europe on this matter, particularly in 2015 and 2016. Now, actually, the problem has passed. We kind of forgotten about this issue, but the Commission actually, I don't know if they wanted, but they made a decision that actually fueled this debate once again. What you can see there are the titles of different portfolios at the European Commission, and there's one that we've already mentioned in class that is very controversial on this issue. And that one is the one you can see here, promoting a European way of life. And actually the content of that portfolio refers to migration, and it's interesting to debate this issue. What does the European Union mean with this? What does the Commission mean with promoting our European way of life? What's the European way of life? Is it about welcoming people, or is it quite the opposite and protecting national identities? But this is a debate, a broad debate. Actually, I'm going to upload a news article on this issue that you can read if you want on Blackboard. But as you can see, this is an issue that is still very alive. That actually the way that the US and Europe are addressing this issue does not differ that much, and and the soft power we were talking about in the international relations culture that Europe tries to cherish, so to say, it's kind of hypercritical in this case in terms of how we're dealing with migration and how we're dealing with refugees. So guys, this was about it. I'll see you on Wednesday. Have a nice day today. Bye.